The ordinary morning that didn't feel quite right. It started like any other day, or at least, that's what I told myself as I rolled out of bed. The sky was gray, muted by a blanket of clouds that seemed to press against the window like a warning. I didn't think much of it. I went through the motions, brushed my teeth, brewed some coffee, glanced at my phone. But there was something in the air that I couldn't name, a subtle discomfort, like the world was holding its breath. I was already running late. My alarm hadn't gone off, or maybe I'd snoozed it without realizing. My usual rhythm was off. I spilled coffee on my shirt, forgot my wallet on the kitchen counter, and had to go back upstairs to grab it. Little things. Nothing catastrophic. Just enough to unsettle me. On the train, I sat in silence, headphones in but no music playing. My mind wandered to the meetings I had lined up, the emails I needed to send, the endless list of obligations that, lately, had started to blur together into one long to-do list with no end in sight. I felt like I was running a race I never signed up for, always behind, always exhausted. I'd been ignoring it for weeks, pushing the feeling down, numbing it with distractions and busyness. But that morning, for reasons I didn't yet understand, everything felt heavier, as if life was about drawing a line between before and after. And even though I didn't know it then, it was that ordinary, restless morning that would lead me straight into the storm, a day where everything would unravel. And somehow, it would be the best thing that ever happened to me. The breaking point, when everything fell apart. By mid-morning, the cracks had started to show. The first email I opened was a notice the client I'd spent weeks preparing for had pulled out at the last minute. No explanation. Just gone. I stared at the screen for a full minute, numb. I had invested so much time, energy, and late nights into that project. Now it meant nothing. Then came the phone call from my manager. She wasn't angry, just distant, professional but cold. "We're restructuring," she said. "Nothing personal, but your position is being phased out." Just like that. I'd been working at the company for nearly 5 years. I thought I was secure. I thought I mattered. That call ended with a polite goodbye, but the silence that followed rang louder than anything I'd ever heard. I left the building without speaking to anyone. My hands were shaking. I walked aimlessly through the city, surrounded by people who had no idea my world had just imploded. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe deeply enough to catch up to my own panic. I stopped at a park bench and sat there for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat. Empty. The final blow came in the form of a text. It was from someone I cared about deeply. Someone I thought would always be there. The message was short, almost casual. "We need to talk." You know how that goes. By the end of that conversation, one more piece of my life slipped away. All in one day. My job, my plans, my sense of stability, my relationship, all of it crumbled. It was the kind of day that makes you question everything. Why did I work so hard? Why did I trust so easily? Why did I ignore the signs that something was off? And yet, sitting in that pit of confusion and pain, something strange began to stir inside me. A tiny, stubborn voice that whispered, "Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine." Unexpected clarity, a quiet moment of realization. That evening, after wandering the city for hours with no clear destination, I ended up in a small, nearly empty cafe. I wasn't even hungry, just tired. Tired in a way that went beyond the physical. I ordered tea, not because I wanted it, but because it gave me something to do with my hands. I sat at a table by the window, watching the rain smear the lights of passing cars into glowing streaks on the glass. And then something unexpected happened. Not a grand epiphany, not a dramatic moment, just stillness. For the first time that day, I wasn't running. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't trying to fix anything or make sense of everything that had fallen apart. I just sat still, and in that stillness, something inside of me settled. There's something profoundly humbling about losing control, about watching the carefully stacked pieces of your life collapse. And as painful as it was, that collapse made one thing glaringly clear. I had been building a life on foundations that weren't really mine. I had said yes, too often out of fear. I had pursued goals that sounded impressive but didn't actually resonate with who I was. I had been performing a version of success that never truly felt like mine. Sitting in that quiet cafe, I realized I had been living a life of constant noise, deadlines, expectations, obligations. And now, in the silence left by all that had disappeared, I could finally hear myself think. Or rather, feel what I had been too busy to feel. What if everything falling apart wasn't the end? What if it was an invitation? An invitation to stop, to reflect, to ask myself, maybe for the first time in years, what do I actually want? What kind of life would feel true? Not just impressive on paper, but fulfilling to live day by day. It wasn't clarity in the form of answers, not yet, but it was clarity in the form of space. Space to begin again. And that realization, quiet as it was, hit me harder than the chaos of the day ever did. Sometimes, the breakdown is what clears the way for something real. Facing the mirror, confronting the person I'd been avoiding. The day after everything unraveled, the job loss, the breakup, the missed opportunity, I stayed in bed longer than I usually allowed myself to. Not because I was tired, but because I was scared. Scared of what I might see if I actually looked. Not in the mirror, but inward. But eventually I got up. I walked past the mirror in the hallway and caught a glimpse of myself. I stopped, and for the first time in a long time, I really looked. I didn't see someone who had failed. I didn't see a victim of bad luck. I saw someone who had been running on autopilot. Someone who had mastered the art of appearing composed, driven, successful, while silently drifting further and further away from themselves. And it hit me. I had been avoiding myself. Every time I buried myself in work, every time I agreed to something I didn't believe in, every time I told myself this is just how life works, I was stepping further away from the person I used to be, the person I wanted to be. I had become a reflection of other people's expectations, a collage of borrowed ambitions. It's a strange thing, confronting the gap between who you are and who you've become. It's not shame that hurts the most. It's the quiet grief, the mourning of a self you abandoned piece by piece in the name of fitting in, staying safe, being acceptable. In that moment, I didn't have a solution. I didn't know how to fix anything. But I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep pretending. I wasn't going to keep running from the reflection in the mirror. I owed myself the honesty I had been denying. So I started small. I wrote down a list, not of goals, but of truths. I'm not happy in my career. I've been afraid to be alone. I've been performing confidence instead of building it. I miss who I was before I started trying to be impressive. Writing those things down didn't change my circumstances. But it changed me. It gave me a starting point. A real one. Not built on illusion or pressure, but on raw, unfiltered truth. And from that truth, a new kind of strength started to grow. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything, just the strength to look in the mirror and finally say, this is where I begin again. Letting go of control, embracing the beauty of surrender. Up until that moment, I had lived my life like a chess game. Every move calculated, every decision aimed at some distant outcome. Success, recognition, security. Control had become my safety net. If I could plan enough, predict enough, perfect enough, maybe I could outrun failure. Maybe I could protect myself from disappointment. But the day everything fell apart, my job, my relationship, the version of my life I had so carefully constructed, I came face to face with a truth I had always feared. No matter how tightly you grip the wheel, life doesn't always go your way. At first, that realization felt like a kind of death. The death of certainty. The death of control. It left me disoriented, vulnerable, stripped of the armor I'd spent years building. I tried for a few days to reclaim some kind of order, cleaning obsessively, making lists, overanalyzing the past, searching for what I could have done differently. But deep down, I knew. Control had become my cage. And so I let go. Not in a dramatic way. There was no grand speech, no life-changing epiphany. It was more like an exhale, the slow release of years of tension. I stopped trying to force a solution. I stopped pretending I had all the answers. I allowed myself to be in the mess, to sit in the confusion, to not have a plan. What surprised me was what I found in that space, peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything figured out, but the kind that comes from finally accepting that you don't need to. That it's okay to not know. That sometimes, letting go isn't weakness, it's trust. Trust that things will unfold as they need to. Trust that even in the chaos, there's a kind of order we can't always see. In that surrender, I discovered something I never expected: freedom. The freedom to feel, to explore, to be human. I began to walk, not with a map, but with curiosity. I listened more, to myself, to the quiet, to life. Letting go didn't solve all my problems. It didn't magically rebuild everything I had lost. But it did something deeper. It helped me remember that control was never the goal. Presence was, growth was, connection was, and all of those things begin when we stop clenching so tightly to what should have been, and finally open our hands to what is. Small moments of clarity, finding wisdom in the ordinary. After the initial chaos of that disastrous day, something unexpected began to happen. Amidst the fragments of what I thought was my real life, small, quiet moments began to stand out. Not the dramatic kind, not epiphanies or cinematic breakthroughs, but subtle, ordinary fragments of life that suddenly seemed to carry a deeper meaning. It was in the way the sunlight came through the kitchen window while I made coffee. In the way an old friend messaged me just to check in, not knowing how much I needed it. In the deep breath I took after crying myself empty, when for a brief second, I felt still. These weren't solutions to my problems. They didn't answer the big questions. But they were reminders that life continues, that beauty exists even in broken places, and that meaning often hides in the places we overlook when we're too busy chasing something bigger. I started writing things down. A sentence someone said that struck a chord. A line in a book that felt like it was written for me. The smell of the air after rain. I wasn't trying to make sense of everything. I was just paying attention. And the more I paid attention, the more I realized how much wisdom is embedded in the simplest things when we're not distracted by control, comparison, or urgency. It wasn't that the pain disappeared, it didn't. But it started to coexist with something else, a growing awareness that even in the aftermath, even in uncertainty, I was still being offered something. A chance to notice, to listen, to learn. I realized that healing doesn't always come through grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives through the tiniest cracks in our daily lives, like weeds growing through pavement, persistent and quiet and alive. Sometimes, all it takes is one honest conversation. One walk without your phone. One night sitting under the stars without trying to fix anything, just being there. These small moments didn't fix my life, but they anchored me. They reminded me that clarity doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And if you're listening, those whispers can change everything. The inner shift, redefining success, control, and what actually matters. As I slowly moved through the aftermath of that day when everything collapsed, I began to realize something profound. The way I had been defining success, happiness, and even my own identity had been built on foundations I never chose for myself. They were borrowed ideas, from society, from school, from social media, from the well-meaning but rigid advice of others. Be productive. Make money. Look like you've got it all together. Don't fall behind. But when everything unraveled, the plans, the expectations, the polished self-image, I was left with nothing to perform for. No one to impress. And it was terrifying at first. Without those external definitions, I felt lost. But then, slowly, I began to feel something else: freedom. I started to question things I had never questioned before. What if success wasn't about always moving up, but about moving deeper? What if control was never real in the first place, just a story we tell ourselves to feel safe? What if purpose didn't come from achieving something impressive, but from living in alignment with your values, even when no one's watching? I used to think having it all together meant looking perfect from the outside, checking all the boxes, never showing weakness. But now, I began to feel the strength in vulnerability. In saying, I don't know. In admitting, I need help. In being human, messy, unfinished, but real. And something interesting happened when I let go of needing to constantly prove myself. I could breathe again. I could say no without guilt. I could pursue things because they felt right, not because they would make me look good. I started asking better questions, like, what gives me energy? Who do I feel safe around? What would I do if I wasn't afraid of failing? Redefining what matters didn't happen overnight. It was, and still is, a process. Some days, I still fall back into old habits, measuring myself against others, doubting my worth. But now, I have something I didn't have before: awareness. And that awareness is a kind of power. It gives me the ability to pause, to redirect, to choose differently. The inner shift wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about stripping away the noise and getting closer to who I've always been, the version of me that exists when I stop performing and start listening. When I stop chasing and start trusting. That shift, from external validation to internal alignment, changed everything. Not all at once, and not perfectly, but enough to say, that terrible day, the one that seemed like the end, it was the start of something truer, something lighter, something finally mine. Small habits, big impact, rebuilding life one choice at a time. After the chaos had settled, and I began to rediscover a sense of clarity, I realized that rebuilding a meaningful life didn't require some grand gesture or overnight transformation. It came down to something far less glamorous, small, consistent, intentional actions. Tiny decisions, made daily, that slowly rewired my sense of identity and stability. This was a lesson that humbled me and saved me. At first, I wanted to overhaul everything, fix my schedule, change my career, become someone entirely different. But that approach only left me overwhelmed. What actually worked was starting small, almost invisibly small. Drinking a glass of water as soon as I woke up, making my bed even if nothing else in the day went right, putting my phone down for 10 minutes and sitting in silence, just to remember what it feels like to be present. These habits didn't seem like much at the time, but they gave me something crucial, a sense of agency. When life felt like it had spun out of my control, these small actions were proof that I still had choices. I could choose to take care of myself, even in the smallest ways. And each time I followed through, I was casting a vote for a new version of myself, someone who could be trusted to show up, even when things were hard. Eventually, those micro-habits began to evolve. I started journaling, not for productivity, but for reflection, to ask myself better questions and listen to my inner voice. I set boundaries with people who drained me, even though it felt uncomfortable at first. I prioritized sleep, even when it meant saying no to plans. I built morning and evening rituals that helped me feel grounded, even when the rest of my day was uncertain. The key wasn't perfection. I messed up plenty of times. I still do. The key was persistence, progress over performance, showing up for myself not out of punishment or pressure, but out of care. A quiet kind of discipline that didn't scream for attention but whispered, "You're worth the effort." And over time, those small habits began to accumulate. My energy shifted. My self-respect grew. And without realizing it, I was creating a life that felt more intentional, one that aligned with the values I had redefined earlier in my healing process. A life that wasn't just about surviving the bad days, but about building something steady enough to carry me through them. What I learned is this: when the big picture feels impossible, zoom in. Pick one thing, just one, and do it with love, not fear. That's where real change begins. Not in the epic moments, but in the quiet, ordinary ones. In the habits we choose when no one is watching. Embracing vulnerability, learning to ask for help and let others in. For most of my life, I wore self-reliance like armor. I convinced myself that strength meant handling everything on my own, especially the hard things. Asking for help felt like failure, like weakness. After the worst day of my life, that belief only intensified. I withdrew, kept my pain private, and told myself I'd figure it out eventually alone. But the truth is, the more I isolated myself, the heavier everything became. I was crumbling under the weight of silent struggle, pretending everything was fine while barely holding on. And the turning point came not from some dramatic intervention, but from a moment of quiet desperation, when I finally said out loud, "I'm not okay." That simple act cracked the shell I had built around myself. I started small, reaching out to one close friend and sharing what I was going through, even if my voice trembled. To my surprise, they didn't judge me. They didn't try to fix everything. They just listened. That moment was more healing than I expected. It reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's how we connect. It's how we heal. Slowly, I began to open up more, to a therapist, to family members, to a support group of people who had faced similar struggles. These conversations didn't solve all my problems, but they helped me carry them. They gave me perspective. They reminded me I wasn't broken, just human. Learning to ask for help also meant unlearning the toxic idea that independence is always better than interdependence. I discovered that true strength isn't about doing it all alone. It's about knowing when to lean on others. It's about trusting that you are worthy of being supported, even when you're not at your best. And the more I practiced vulnerability, the more I saw how it invited others to be real with me too. My relationships deepened. I stopped wearing a mask. People could finally see the real me and love me anyway. Letting others and didn't make me weak. It gave me the strength I didn't know I had. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from standing tall, it comes from collapsing into someone else's arms and saying, I need you. This shift, from isolation to connection, from shame to shared humanity, was one of the most transformative parts of my journey. And it's something I carry with me now, a quiet reminder that we were never meant to do this alone. Finding meaning in the chaos, turning pain into purpose. Looking back, I used to ask, why did this happen to me? It's a question that haunted me through sleepless nights, during anxious walks, and in the silence after crying myself dry. The day everything fell apart, the failures, the losses, the heartbreak, felt like a cruel twist of fate. At the time, all I could see was destruction. But slowly, something changed. I stopped asking why me and started asking what now. That shift was subtle, but it was everything. Because pain, left alone, just festers. But pain, examined, pain understood becomes fuel. It becomes direction. And for me, it became purpose. The worst day of my life broke me open. It stripped away illusions, distractions, and the noise of who I thought I should be. In the wreckage, I began to see pieces of something honest, something real. I started reflecting on what really mattered. Not success or perfection or approval, but presence, meaning, connection. I realized that the life I had been building wasn't truly mine. It was shaped by expectations, not authenticity. So I started rebuilding, brick by brick. And with every step, I asked myself, does this align with who I really am? Is this rooted in truth or fear? I began writing more. I helped a friend through a similar breakdown. I started sharing my story in small ways, and people began to open up in return. I wasn't alone anymore, and more importantly, I had something to give. That's when I realized my pain wasn't just mine. It was a bridge. My struggles could be someone else's lifeline. Purpose doesn't always come in lightning bolts. Sometimes, it's born from rubble, from rebuilding after everything's been burned down. And meaning isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes, it's found in quiet choices. Showing up, being kind, telling the truth, doing the hard thing even when no one's watching. Today, I still carry the scars from that day, but they're not symbols of weakness. They're proof that I survived, grew, and chose to become more than the sum of what happened to me. I learned that life doesn't guarantee ease, but it does offer meaning if we're willing to dig deep and create it. In the end, what broke me also built me. And now, when I help others find their way through chaos, I realize that terrible day was exactly what I needed to wake up, to become someone I'm proud of, someone with purpose.